All right, time for the 7 habits of highly effective drafters. These are from Matthew Berry himself. Habit number 1.
Yes, sir.
Pretty simple. Spend a ton of time preparing.
Yeah, honestly, like anything in life, your fantasy football success comes, what you put into it is what you get out of it, right? And so whether it is watching our show, reading stuff on rotoworld.com, reading my stuff, reading, Denny Carter stuff, RotoPat, whoever, the RotoWorld Draft Guide doing that. But honestly, there's lots of great websites out there, lots of great analysts, but got to mock draft, got to understand where you're mock drafting. This is important. We're going to talk about this sooner, but in a little bit. But understand that where you draft greatly influences what happens in your draft, meaning that the ADP on ESPN is different than the one on Yahoo, which is different than Sleeper, which is different than NFL or CBS or MFL. Any of the places where you can draft, ADP greatly affects that. So mock drafting on the site that you're going to draft on, reading, researching, watching, listening, doing as much prep as you can so that when you're in there for the moment, you're ready for it.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is just understanding ADP and just going in and not just accepting necessarily the consensus order that is in front of you on the platform that you're using, and just knowing that, okay, in the range of the 110s, like we were talking about, might be Zay Flowers, might be Elijah Moore, might be Odell Beckham, and having an idea of who you like most out of those guys in advance, as opposed to getting there and being on the clock and having 60 seconds at that point to choose and just recognizing in that.
Also, by the way, I know this is going to sound like super dumb and obvious, but you'd amaze at how many people don't realize this. Understand your league rules. And by understanding your league rules, I mean inside and out. There are ways to sort of look through the nooks and crannies and figure out ways to advance. Just small stuff like, right? Again, are you playing 3 wide receivers or are you playing 2, right? Is it, obviously what's the scoring? Is it half point PPR? Is it tight end premium scoring, what have you? But also, how big is your bench? Do you have IR spots? How many IR spots? If you have a big bench and multiple IR spots, you can be like, all right, I can take more of a gamble on some high, good but injury-prone players. But if you're in a league that has a 3-man bench and no IR spots, you're like, I probably got to be a little bit more conservative. How many teams make the playoffs, right? So you can be like, all right. And you some leagues start in week 15. Some I've seen week 16. Are you in a 12-team league and 6 teams make the playoffs, 8 teams make the playoffs, or 4? Just, okay, if I'm middle of the pack in this league, I make the playoffs, great. That's a different mindset than, it's a 12-team league and only 4 teams make the playoffs. Okay, I've got to be elite. I've got to swing for more of the fences, right? So again, it's a mindset about understanding exactly what your league settings are in every facet so you can approach the draft correctly.
Yeah, and I think the main thing there these days is just understanding a strategy for superflex leagues, which I think more and more people are doing, as they should. It is the best way to play, I think, and just not panicking and being like, there's been 10 quarterbacks taken, I'm going to take Geno Smith in the first round. Right. But actually having an understanding of what is value in that format.
So speaking of that, I'm actually, all of us are in a super flex league.
You still made
we're going to do the mock draft. We're doing the mock draft. We'll do it on Wednesday as well. I had the first pick. I got Jalen Hurts. It's a super flex league, so not surprising. A lot of quarterbacks go early. Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, Josh Allen. Lawrence took Donovan Peoples-Jones, which is super weird at the 4 spot.
Yeah, I thought he was going to go Justin Jefferson there.
Yeah, I did too, but I don't know. It is what it is, and so on. A lot of quarterbacks in the first round. So it comes back to me. Really interesting where Anthony Richardson went in this league. We'll talk about all that. But so I'm now on the clock. I went Jalen Hurts at 1. Come back around to me. And I will tell you that, so my quarterbacks that are available to me, the best available quarterbacks, if I wanted to go QB, Rodgers, Cousins, Geno, Daniel Jones, Goff, Russell Wilson, kind of that range. It's fine. Because I have Jalen Hurts, I feel like I can wait on my second quarterback here. Almost everyone in the league has at least one quarterback here. But look at who's sitting there at running back. Barkley and Henry, and I have the back-to-back pick here. Barkley and Henry are both there. And then it gets into, Taylor, Jacobs, Pollard, those guys. And wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb is there, Devontae Adams is there. Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I'm going my ride or die. I'm going Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I'm going to go Saquon. So those are my two, so I'm starting with Hurts, Saquon, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yep. And I figure that whoever I'll get as my second quarterback will be fine. Will come back around to me. There'll be somebody. It'll be in the Tannehill, Derek Carr range probably. But I think I can live with a guy, Kenny Pickett, Sam Howell, somebody that's going to, ideally what you want is just somebody that's going to start all year long, barring injury, for your second, when you're blowing off a second quarterback there. So, I don't know, the value to me for Amon-Ra and Barkley, who are the highest ranked players I have at those positions available, is too great. And, and Lawrence just took Elijah Moore. Super weird.
Browns receiving core.
Yeah,
He's just building a team of the Browns.
Crushing.
My biggest advice for Superflex would be if you're picking towards the end of the first round and everyone in front of you is taking quarterbacks, then you can be pretty certain that they're not going to go quarterback, and you can probably get one, and you can go running back, wide receiver with your first pick.
All right, habit number 2, identify the relative depth at every position.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just helpful to understand when you're going into. Like, you're going to want rankings, you're going to have an opinion on every single player, but for example, right, you're going to want to know where are players going, what's the depth of the position. So we just talked about quarterbacks. 7 quarterbacks have an 8, this is per ESPN. 7 quarterbacks have an ADP inside the top 50, but only 2 quarterbacks have an ADP between 51 and 100. That's Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. Geno Smith, Anthony Richardson, Jared Goff, all going after pick 125. So the idea is basically, if you want a top 7 or 8 quarterback, you're going to have to use a top 50 pick on him. Then there's the other 2 guys, right, and Lawrence and Watson. But if I don't get one of those guys, I'm on a 12-team league, then just wait. Understand that, right? So running backs, there's only 2 running backs that have a top 10 ADP, and that's CMC and Eckler. But 6 running backs have an ADP between 10 and 20. So in essence, there's basically 8 running backs that are top 20 picks, and then after that, it's a little bit more. So you can just sort of say, oh, okay, I either want an elite guy or I want to wait because I can, this is a good year to do 0 RB or modified 0 RB. Wide receivers. There are 10 different wide receivers going inside the first 20 picks, 20 wide receivers being drafted inside the top 50 compared with just 15 running backs. So again, a little bit more depth at the wide receiver position. Obviously, the first round is littered with wide receivers, so I don't mind getting an elite wide receiver, but then I think you can wait till like the 3rd or 4th round for wide receiver number 2. Just something to think about there. And then at tight end, I've said this before, I said this year, I either want to be one of the first guys in my league to grab a tight end this year or one of the last. Kelsey obviously has a first-round ADP. It's currently 5.6. There's no other tight end inside the top 30. There's 5 different tight ends that go between picks 45 and 70. Hawkinson, Waller, Kittle, Pitts, Goddard. I don't think those guys are the same tier. I think Andrews, is kind of a second tier, right? So he's somewhere between, he's going like in the 3rd round. And then I actually like Hawkinson quite a bit this year. I think Waller's going to move up there. And then I think Kittle, Pitts, Goddard are in a slight, there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 2A, if you will. But in essence, where I think is, if you want one of those superstars, or if not, like, the difference between Goddard and Kittle to me isn't much this year. Like, and again, I think there are guys like, so we talked about like Taylor Higbee, David Njoku. I think there are guys that are going in that 9, 10, 11, 12 range that I think are fine as well if you punt on the position and you're just picking late.
I think gaps really matter. Talent gaps is what you're saying. And that's really important to educate yourself
and
on.
Fantasy production. As my point is just like, just realize that if you're not getting, like again with a tight end, like you're like, okay, if I'm not getting Kelsey in the first round and I'm not getting Andrews like in the 2nd or 3rd, then I'm probably picking in this range. And if I'm not picking in this range, here's where I'm picking from. It's just, again, understanding the depth of every position and where it all kind of lays out for you as you prepare your draft board.
Habit number 3, minimize risk and give yourself best odds to win on a weekly basis.
This is a huge thing. The most important word in that whole sentence is weekly. Fantasy football is not a season-long game. It is a weekly game that's played over the course of a year. Your goal in season-long fantasy football is literally to construct a team of players that can beat whoever you're playing that week and that week only. That's all you have to do. So obviously we put a lot of stock into all sorts of underlying metrics and film work and news, but the truth of the matter is that fantasy football very simply comes down to that. Put yourself in the best position. Minimize risk. It's all you're trying to predict the future and you can't. So you just have to ask yourself in every situation, what's most likely to happen? Travis Kelce has had 7 straight seasons finishing as a top 2 tight end in fantasy points per game. 7 straight seasons. He's got the same quarterback and the same coach. What's most likely to happen? Doesn't mean it's going to. Injuries can happen, everything like that. But what's most likely to happen? Kirk Cousins finished each of the last 3 seasons as either QB 11 or QB 12 on a points per game basis. What's most likely to happen? Doesn't mean it will, but what's most likely to happen? Deontay Johnson had 147 targets last year without a touchdown, but ranked top 6 in end zone targets. What's most likely to happen this year? The guy was a top 6 wide receiver who has scored touchdowns in multiple seasons up until last year. It's most likely that he's not going to have a 0 for touchdowns. Jamal Williams got 38 goal line carries last year, 15 more than any other running back. What's most likely to happen this year? That Jamal Williams gets 15 more carries than everyone else within the 2-yard line? No. I mean, it's just, again, what's most likely to happen? I'm using some extreme examples to give some context here, but minimize risk and give yourself the best odds to win on a weekly basis.
And I think injuries are a huge part of that too. If a guy's missed 6 games a year for 2 to 3 years,
right,
what's most likely to happen is that he's going to miss a handful of games this year.
And there's an intersection where risk versus reward, obviously. So someone like my man, Michael Thomas, who's going outside the top 100, at that point the risk is, I would say, beyond priced in.
Habit number 4, use rankings flexibly and within context.
Look, team construction is really important. Every league is different. Obviously, as we talked about in Habit 2 and Habit 1, team roster construction about whether you're playing half-point PPR, full PPR, standard, whether it's tight end premium. There's lots of things that go into your specific league. Roster size and scoring have a significant impact on how you construct your roster. 3 wide receivers versus 2. Can you play a quarterback at your flex? Is it a super flex or not? So one thing that I think is important, and we touched on this earlier as well, is being aware of the ADP differences between sites. Okay, for example, Kirk Cousins on ESPN is QB 10, on Yahoo is QB 14. Mixon is running back 9 on ESPN, running back 15 on Yahoo. You see it there on your screen. Rachaad White, running back 18 on ESPN, he's running back 30 on Yahoo. If you're really excited about Alvin Kamara this year, you're better off drafting on Yahoo, where he's going as running back 27. At ESPN, he's going as running back 17. Tyler Lockett is wide receiver 29 on ESPN, but wide receiver 21 on Yahoo. He goes much later on ESPN than he does on Yahoo, for example. Darren Waller is tight end 7 on Yahoo, but he's tight end 4 on ESPN. So it just sort of depends. Understanding the ADP of the site that you're drafting on, we talked about this earlier, so that's important as well. But it's also, like, again, my rankings, if you're using my rankings might not reflect one of those 2 sites. So you're like, oh, this person has whatever. Like, for example, Joe Mixon is running back 9, and I might have him say it running back 10, but you sit here and go, he's running back 14 on Yahoo. Like, use rankings flexibly. Like, you don't want to look there and go like, well, he's ranked lower here. Rankings are merely about value in the market, and the minute a draft starts, value changes for all these players. So I will tell you, as somebody who does rankings every day of my life, I don't even follow my own rankings to a T. Like, I know where I feel on various players, but as drafts go, and you're like, you know what? God, there's this crazy tight end run, and I need a guy, and this is the last guy in my tier. And even though I've got 10 guys ranked ahead of him, I feel really good about my wide receivers and running backs. I need this guy because he's the last guy in the tier, so I'm going to draft this tight end. Again, use rankings as a guideline, not a hard and fast rule. Don't be a slave to your rankings.
I'd say as well to be up to date on ADP stuff for guys like Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs, because that moves wildly based on the context of their situations, which are very unique, as opposed to someone like Nick Chubb is probably going to be pretty static.
Think about how we opened the show today. Javonte Williams played football after tearing his ACL, PCL, LCL in week 4 of last year. So habit number 5, and you touched on this lightly in habit 3, Barry, but this is more consistent here. Focus on winning weeks.
Right. Focus on winning weeks. So again, when you leave your draft, understand that you're leaving your draft with a blueprint. The team you leave your draft with is not the team that you have to start every single week. Again, you're going to have some foundational blocks there, but think about Latavius Murray last year. Latavius Murray, who wasn't drafted, but for 12 games with the Broncos last year, he was a top 25 fantasy running back. Deion Jackson, in the 2 games that Jonathan Taylor were out, weeks 5 and 6, he averaged over 20 fantasy points per game. Alexander Mattison, he's had 4 starts over the past 2 seasons when Dalvin Cook has been out. He's averaged 21.7 fantasy points per game. Khalil Herbert, last year as the lead running back, he had 2 games when Montgomery was out. He averaged 21 points per game. Again, it's one thing to say, like, hey, I'm drafting this guy late. right? And I hope he pops. It's one thing to have a guy that produces. It's another thing of knowing when to start that guy. And so I would much rather have somebody, the example was Tony Pollard, right? But I'd much rather have, a guy like, trying to think of a really good example here, but that you would draft, that that guy's going to be the guy, right?
Damian Pierce?
Yeah, I mean, there's an example. There's not like a great Tajay Spears we talked about earlier in the show. Like, we think Tajay Spears is going to, if Derrick Henry, you're never starting Tajay Spears.
Yep.
But if Derrick Henry goes down, Tajay Spears is probably going to be like a top 12 running back.
Right.
That's my point. Is that and so you'd rather like guys like that because there's a chance that Tajay Spears wins you 3 weeks this year, right? And so I'd much rather a guy like that than somebody who's ranked higher than him, who's just sort of like a mediocre, fine kind of like, whatever running back.
Samaje Perine?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think Samaje Perine has a better year, but Deontay Foreman's going to get like 10 touches a game. He's going to be fine. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But right, that's what I'm saying. Like, you want guys that can win you the week. That's what you're focused on. Like, right? Rookie wide receivers that will pop later in the season, for example. That's another good to use late round flyers on.
Last 2 habits. Habit 6, be adaptable and trust yourself above all others. And habit 7, approach the draft as just the first step towards success.
Number 2, again, no one knows your league or your team better than you. This is something we do for fun. Trust your gut above all else as well. Don't go into a draft saying, like, I must come away with Kelsey in the first round. Well, if Kelsey goes 101, even if you have the second pick, be ready to adapt. Just be flexible during the draft. Like, don't panic when there are runs. Even if you're getting snaked out of a position, draft a surplus at another position that gives you something to trade, which leads us to habit number 7. Again, this is just the first step towards your success this year. It's a blueprint. You can always trade. You can always pick up players on the waiver wire. The team you leave the draft with is not the team that you have to start week in, week out. So again, like, if you're just like there's this crazy running back run, instead of just grabbing a guy that qualifies at running back, you know what I mean? Be like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to load up on wide receivers, and then I will trade an elite wide receiver for a good running back later in the draft. You're better off doing that than just, picking some random guy because he's got a pulse. Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBC Sports and Rotoworld.com. Just want to thank you so much for watching what you just watched, or at least being too lazy to click out of it after the autoplay just kept it going. So either way, thank you so much for just letting it scroll by your screen. And now I'd like to ask you respectfully, please subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel for the latest NFL news, fantasy headlines from Rotoworld, and betting analysis from NBC Sports Edge.